The next panel will expound upon the ways in which the Indirect Source Rule is becoming a leading vehicle to advance zero-emission transportation policy. Leading the panel is LACI's own Director of City Climate Innovation, Jack Symington, and panelists include Ian MacMillan, Assistant Deputy Executive Officer at South Coast Air Quality Management District, Adrian Martinez, Director of Right to Zero at Earthjustice, and Andrea Vidaurre, Co-founder and Policy Coordinator at the People's Collective for Environmental Justice.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. As Cam mentioned, Jack Symington, Director of City Climate Innovation at LACI. In that role, I've really been lucky to be involved in a lot of our freight electrification efforts. The Transportation Electrification Partnership from day one had really emphasized addressing air pollution on the 710 corridor, not only as a means to meet our transportation goals, but to address the air pollution in Southeast LA County. And a huge part of that, especially in 2020 and 2021, was this indirect source rule. I know people on the last panel talked about kind of energy policy wonkiness. We're going to go a little bit deeper on policy wonkiness here from an air pollution regulation standpoint, but we'll start off with a little bit of context to give everyone a sense of what we're talking about. So, with that, we'll go down the line, get a little bit of context from each of these folks. Feel free to provide a little background on yourselves and organization as well. But we'll start with Ian from the South Coast Air Quality Management District, the agency responsible. Ian, can you just give a little bit of background on, what an ISR is, kind of what AQMD's role is there, what this warehouse rule looks like in practice?
Great, thanks so much, Jack. So as you can tell, Jack and I are almost tall enough to start in the NBA, but really I'm honored to be joined by true giants in air quality advocacy here. So it's in for a treat today. I'm going to confess, and hopefully Matt isn't listening, I skipped the last couple hours to go watch a soccer game because it was really exciting, but it speaks to the power of sport. Right, and we're really in this unique moment right now where sport is bringing people together, and you have conversations that you don't always get to have, and you're bringing different folks together, and so it's a great opportunity. Thinking about, to the questions you're asking, so first, who is South Coast AQMD? We are the air pollution agency for the greater Los Angeles metropolitan area, Orange County, Inland Empire. If we were our own state, we'd be the 5th largest state by population. So we're a fairly large metropolitan area that our agency governs. We're here because, unfortunately, we have the worst air quality in the nation. When it comes to ozone, we're the worst in the nation. When it comes to fine particulate matter, we're among the worst. Good news is, think back to the last Olympics that were here, and show of hands, anybody here from the 1984 Olympics? Great. We have mountains here. This wasn't always obvious back in 1984. And pollution is down, smog is down by more than half since that time. And it's due to the work of my agency before my time, and then the Air Resources Board, EPA, et cetera. So a lot of policies have gone into place. A lot of new innovations have gone into place. This indirect source rule that we're going to talk about here is one of these new innovations. Why did we want to focus on warehouses? The goods movement industry in our region, that's responsible for about half of the smog-forming pollution here. And it causes some significant localized concerns, too, for local communities. So, why do you rob a bank? That's where the money is. Why do you address, emissions from warehouses? Because that's where the emissions are. So when we look at what is an indirect source rule itself, it really just is an air quality regulation. And it's focused really on air quality, and the way the law is set up, it's better to address air quality as an issue as opposed to climate when it comes to indirect source rules. It just requires facilities to address the emissions from the mobile sources that go to that facility. So if you're thinking about a warehouse, it's from the trucks coming to that facility. Trucks make up about 90% of the emissions from a warehouse. So an indirect source rule requires warehouses to address the emissions from all those mobile sources going to them. In 2021, South Coast AQMD adopted the Warehouse Indirect Source Rule. We call it the WARE program. And the way that this program works is it requires about 4,000 warehouses in our region, which is huge. We're easily the largest warehousing region in the nation. And it requires all those warehouses to take actions. And there's a menu of options, and they can pick and choose off that menu. And it's a points-based system. I think folks are used to LEED for building design. It works fairly similarly. There's a menu, there's points with everything on the menu, and they just pick and choose. They have to earn a certain number of points every year, and then they can just pick and choose how they want to do it. The kinds of things that are on the menu are things like acquiring zero-emission trucks or having those trucks visit their facility, whether or not they own those trucks. Putting in charging infrastructure or having that charging infrastructure be used, putting in solar panels, using solar panels, a number of other options that are out there. And so this is, it provides some flexibility to warehouses, and flexibility is really key. This is a complex rule, and so having some flexibility is really important. But ultimately, what I can say is that this rule, it's not designed to get everybody down to zero. It's not the right tool for that, but it can really help build the ecosystem. And so what we're expecting with this rule is, after it's fully phased in, about a 15% reduction in smog-forming emissions. When we look at the kinds of rules that we do at South Coast AQMD, we feel great if we get about a 0.1 to a 0.2 ton per day reduction in smog-forming emissions from a rule. This rule gets you somewhere between 1.5 to 3 tons a day. So we're really proud of it, but there's a lot of work to do on it, and I'm sure you're going to hear some more from others. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And I love the idea that it is, the sports analogy. It was really a team effort to get this rule across the line. Back in 2021 or so. Certainly one of the leaders of the teams that team was the community. Andrea, why has this been so important to a lot of the frontline communities in the Inland Empire and in Southern California, and kind of how were you able to kind of get all the communities aligned on this and pushing for it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy to talk about warehouses when they're right behind your home. So it wasn't hard to get communities involved. If anything, actually, it's really important to get people that are affected by these sources of pollution involved in the decision making and the policy making, because they're really going to tell you how urgent do we need to do it, how fast do we need to do it, how stringent do we need to do it. So I work with an environmental justice organization, and our whole job was to try to get people that are most impacted by warehouses, that know exactly what they look like, what they breathe like, when they turn on, when they turn off, involved in the policy process. And specifically, right, air pollution affects everyone in the basin. Warehouses affect everyone in the basin. We don't tend to think about how our stuff is getting to us, but there was all this infrastructure of warehousing had to happen for us to have next day delivery, same day delivery, et cetera. So there's no reason why they cannot be also a part of this zero emission transition to make sure that the people that are living next to it are safe from those emissions. And so we were involved over the course of many years, and actually I'd say community members for over a decade had been going to the Air District calling for solutions around air pollution from warehouses. And we know how important that is. I mean, you guys see how close the Lineage warehouse is next to communities. That's how close these communities are at. And so you can just imagine from those drone shots, it's right behind people's homes. There's 4,000 of those, and thousands of those are right next to a school or right next to a home. So this is a really important issue, whether you live next to a warehouse or whether you shop online or whether you get something at the store, right? This does affect us all. And so it wasn't too hard to get people involved, but of course, we don't think of warehouses all the time, so.
Yeah, I do always kind of notice when like a 18-wheeler or tractor trailer is kind of in a residential neighborhood. It's like, oh, what is that doing there? But that's just everywhere across the Inland Empire. Kind of continuing with the sports team analogy that I'm kind of running with on the fly. If the community of the star players, it really seems like Earthjustice and Adrian, you were maybe the coach. So if you can talk about, how you or how the ISR came from concept to implementation, and kind of who was at the table with you and how that kind of happened.
Yeah, so it was a lot of great work from Ian and others at the agency, but there was a whole cohort of folks who I think we were best described as super persistent, and we walked right up to the line and didn't cross the line into annoyance, but we were very persistent over a decade saying, we've got this pollution crisis from the freight industry. Warehouses are polluting communities. We need you to do something about it. And we kept showing up. it was a lot of the environmental groups like Sierra Club, NRDC, and then obviously our partners in community groups like People's Collective for Environmental Justice, East Yard Communities for Environmental Justice, and all these groups came together, convinced the agency we need to do this. One of the things that often happens in these efforts is when anyone starts thinking about cleaning up pollution, the first response is that's illegal, and often the very fancy law firms are hired, they have their fancy letterhead, and they say, you can't do this, you can't do that. And we have a great set of lawyers. The Air District has terrific lawyers, and then on the NGO side or the environmental side, we have a great set of lawyers. So we said, okay, put your money where your mouth is. We're going to pass this and challenge. And there was a lawsuit filed to challenge it in court. We ended up winning because it was lawful, and that was a huge victory for clean air. And I think since then, it's really kind of addressed one key part of the criticism of indirect source rules is that are unlawful. A federal judge in a very lengthy opinion walked through all the arguments from the trucking industry and the airline industry, which challenged it, and said, you know what, you have a right to protect residents through this means, and the rule is lawful. So it really is a strong legal tool. And I think the last thing I'll just say, as we're heading into the Olympics, we are in a much better position on a zero emissions and clean air front, having this rule in place and having it almost to full implementation than we would have been if we did not have it. So it is definitely a huge value add to the region.
Yeah, on that note, we've heard it from someone else today about, right, it's not about just protecting, but how do we have these rules actually benefit some of the communities that we're in as well, not only through the air quality improvements, but the general just quality of life improvements as well. So, Andrea, back to you. From your perspective, kind of what have you been hoping to see as far as changes in your daily lives, or kind of what do you anticipate as we get further down implementation for like the highest desirable impact?
Yeah, I mean, implementation is really exciting because, I mean, I think a lot of communities didn't know what their warehouse neighbor was even doing before this rule, right? There's this huge part about just transparency. How many trucks are going inside? What kind of trucks are they using? What kind of plan do they have to transition those trucks? Are they even thinking about cleaning up their grid or putting up solar panels, right? None of that was very clear. And with this tool, we actually have a mechanism to understand what are each of these different players doing, right? How far is Amazon? How far is Home Depot, IKEA, et cetera? These big box retailers that are in neighborhoods. So that's a big one. And I think just for one is just to see the air quality and public health benefits. There are some places where trucks are driving in and out every single day by the hundreds. And so how is it that 5 years from now, a kid that might be just born this year in 5 years doesn't have to live next to a truck corridor anymore? It's a zero emission corridor now, right? Because that investment is being made into those warehouses. And I do think if this rule wouldn't have happened, we wouldn't have had started that conversation. These conversations have to start ahead of time, and I think that's why it's so good. We're doing this 2 years before the Olympics. Like, we have to start planning for the future, and if we continue to push and push and push, we'll never get there, and we would have wished we started later. With this, yeah, it was, okay, we'll see changes in 5 years, but hey, 5 years just happened, just passed since this rule, and we are seeing the benefits. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned the reporting requirements as well. Ian, in our kind of earlier conversations about this, you touched on just the improved transparency and just getting a better sense of the logistics industry out there. Are there any kind of big surprises, Ian, that you've seen so far from the initial reporting and implementation and compliance efforts?
Yeah, definitely. I would say as far as surprises, I think one of the first surprises is where we're sitting today. I don't think we expected, actually maybe I'll say there, one bad surprise and two good surprises. The bad surprise is we didn't expect that this would be the only rule left standing. So there's been a big change, as we know, out of DC as far as policy direction, and when it comes to regulations requiring the existing fleet to turn over, this is not a fleet rule, but it gets in that space. This is really the only rule that's left. And so that, for good and bad, that's out there. So that's a bad one. On the good side, really surprised by how innovative warehouses have been. They're very adaptable, right? They're in business and they want to be successful, and so they've really figured out how to adapt. One of the things we didn't really expect to see was yard trucks. These are the cargo handling equipment that's operating on site, and before the rule, there was essentially there were no zero-emission yard trucks out there, virtually none. Now, because of this rule, there's more than 300, and that's as of the end of 2024. I'd imagine today there's even more. And it's something that the warehouse operators saw, hey, this is a technology that works for them, and this pushed them into that space, and they figured out how to make it work, and it works great, actually. So that's a really nice, pleasant surprise. The other one, I'll say half-jokingly, a little surprised that the rule worked. There's nothing like this out there in the world. This was the first major, rule like this in 20 years in the current legal and political landscape. And you put a lot of thought into it, talked to a lot of stakeholders in industry, in community, and you sure hope, you put this baby out there and you hope it grows. And it is working. We've heard from plenty of detractors still. There's, those in industry who say, oh, this rule isn't effective, it's more expensive than you thought it was going to be. This rule has a lot of options in it, and there is cost. No doubt there's cost to it. But the benefits, assuming all of the most expensive options are chosen, the benefits are 3 to 1. Right? It has tremendous public health benefit. And what we're seeing is that most expensive option, which is a mitigation fee, only about 5% of all compliance is using that most expensive option. 95% of compliance is using cheaper options. And so we see that, hey, this is actually working as we intended. We're getting the vehicles on the road. We're getting hundreds of trucks on the road, hundreds of chargers out there. And it's going to continue to grow year by year.
Yeah, it is always great to have the actual tangible investments being made that you can see instead of just paying the fee, paying the fine, because then we'll get to that later. But that'll make it out eventually, but on a longer timeline. Adrian, you and a lot of your colleagues have made a great report on some of the effectiveness of this indirect source rule. I'm sure you can rattle off a whole bunch of numbers on kind of what this has translated to as far as equipment out there, dollars out there, air pollution reduced. But if you can kind of share some of what you think are the most impressive metrics with the group.
Yeah, I think one of the most impressive metric, and this is a little bit dated because the analysis comes almost like a year after you get the benefits, but the report that was last issue that talked about the benefits of the rule, it showed that over 800 zero-emission trucks had been purchased to comply with the rule. And for context, that would be about, just the rule itself would be about 11% of California's zero-emission trucks. And for greater context, California is the leader in deployment of zero-emission trucks nationally. So this one rule that we all pushed and got through, it's having an oversized impact in the progression of this industry to zero emission. We also saw that over 800,000, you get visits from zero emission trucks, so you can get credit for buying a zero emission truck, but also credit for having a zero-emission truck pick up cargo or drop off cargo. And so we're seeing over 800,000 zero-emission truck trips from the rule as of last year. So these benefits are only going to go up. We were really pleasantly surprised with how few people are using the mitigation fee option. Is I think less than 5%. But one of the interesting things is even those 5% that are using that fee option, it's generated over about $75 million that the South Coast Air Quality Management District will invest in zero emission in communities. So I think there's just huge benefits from this rule, and it's punching way above its weight, especially in light of what Ian was saying, where we have this attack on a lot of regulations that were pushing zero emission trucks.
Yeah, it's great you use the term market signal, because I think from LACI's perspective, that's something that we were really keen on having this rule out there, to be a signal to entrepreneurs, to investors, that this is a space that is going to be needing your investments, going to be needing your innovations. There's going to be a willing market, a regulated market to purchase this equipment. And so the signal that can send to the investment community to deploy these assets, make the factories to build the trucks and the chargers and invent on distributed energy resource applications has just been phenomenal. One other kind of way that we have seen this as a market signal of sorts is a signal to other cities and states that this is legally defensible, this does work. There are lots of communities across the country that are immediately adjacent to heavy industry, to freight and logistics, who could benefit from such a policy. Adrian, I'll go back to you really quickly. What do you think are the best kind of lessons to learn and kind of the most impactful?
Yeah, so I think there's efforts to pursue indirect source rules in other parts of California. The Bay Area is currently exploring it. There was some statewide legislation to explore it. Statewide legislation being considered in Illinois. There was some discussion of statewide legislation in New York. New York City is looking at it. A lot of places are looking at it. But one of the things that I think has been kind of the frustrating part on our end is one of the arguments against it is these hyperbolic claims that this type of regulation will destroy the freight industry. People will leave. And if you look at what happened in our region, the rule was adopted in 2021, and we saw a massive actual increase in warehouses. We had over 950 or over 100 million square feet of warehouses increase in our region. And so I guess since we're in an MBA arena, a lot of times the opponents of these are trying to say this rule is the Oklahoma City Thunder or the San Antonio Spurs, and it's not quite that. It's more kind of the Minnesota Timberwolves. We still love the Minnesota Timberwolves. We love Anthony Edwards. It's a great team. It's a formidable team, but it's not this kind of wrecking ball that's going to come and be so hard to play and so hard to win. And I think that's one of the big things. These rules are designed to be inherently flexible. Warehouse operators can figure out how they want to comply. And I think one anecdote, when the rule was being discussed, we spent a lot of time talking to people in the clean tech industry, encouraging them to engage Ian and other staff at the agency. And one of the things they conveyed is, we just want a reason to get in the door to talk to warehouse operators. And right now, without any rules in place, there's no reason for them to talk to us about how we can help them get a zero-emission product. What this rule has done is give them a big reason. Hey, I'm going to come talk to you because I want you to do a zero-emission yard truck, electric truck, solar panels, or whatever the technology. So I think these rules aren't scary. They're inherently flexible, and they're having huge benefits. And the more that we can get them done across the country, the better it is. The more zero-emission trucks and other clean equipment we'll be able to sell, and we'll build this ecosystem of actual trucks and other equipment that solves our air pollution crisis.
Yeah, to your point on flexibility as well, we do see this rule as a great example of California's leadership and on our road to 2028, and the Olympics is still a national event. We have been working with New York City for the last year and a half or so on the development of their rule, and to the point of, hey, this is just one player in the ecosystem. They have a lot of policies around last mile transportation for off-hours deliveries, for cargo bikes, all these different incentive programs, maritime delivery to get trucks off the road. And so in New York City, it's this one key player on a bigger team that we're seeing. Ian, I'll go to you. Kind of what's next for the ISR, right? You've talked about how the mitigation fee has been a part of that. SCAQMD is doing so much that's complementary to the rule as well. Kind of where do you see the next kind of steps for the rule?
Yeah, thanks. So I think thinking the lessons learned on all this ties into some of the next steps. So, one of the things that we learned is don't start a major new regulation in the middle of a global pandemic. That makes it a little tough, and I joke about it, but a lot of outreach was needed. Anything that's this, significant, there's a lot of education, a lot of outreach. Frankly, we go and we knock on, some warehouse operators' doors, and they say, "What's an AQMD?" They have no idea that they're regulated by us because they traditionally aren't regulated by air regulations. And so there's been this big focus on education and outreach. Well, we're now a few years into the rule, and we're kind of shifting that focus more now to enforcement, right? Because while at the end of the day, we understand this rule, it's big, it's different, it takes time for the warehousing industry to come into compliance. They need to be in compliance, it's a rule. And so, we've issued over 950 notices of violation to these warehouses. That's going to continue, and we're just going to continue to work through and get everybody into the system. Moving on to some of the other, next steps here. We have this mitigation fee that's about $75 million that we've collected so far. We're going to open up a solicitation this fall, we're going to bring something to our board in September. And then the idea is to fund chargers and trucks for warehousing, right? And so we think that's a nice program, and that's going to be every year. We don't think it's going to be $75 million every year, but it is going to be an annual funding program. The last one I do want to mention, it's not really a warehouse rule thing, but I do want to mention another funding program that is underway right now, and this is our Invest Clean program. This is a $500 million grant that we got from EPA. It's the largest grant that was ever given by the Office of Air, and we got it. We're very proud of it in July 2024, and we've been able to keep it so far, which is kind of amazing. And so we did just award about $250 million for zero-emission locomotives, cargo handling equipment, chargers. We've got another $250 million to go. All of those vehicles per the grant need to be on the road or on the rails, what have you, by 2028. So we have a lot happening in that space. We're very excited about that program. Some of that will go towards warehousing, but it's just the goods movement industry in general.
So, Andrea, a lot of these investments are going to be made kind of in these communities. I'm curious if you have a perspective on kind of how you would like to see those investments made to, again, not only clean up the air in the communities, but to kind of economically uplift the communities as well and the small businesses who might not be, Amazon or what have you.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think there has to be a prioritization in the neighborhoods that are most impacted, where there's the highest level of air pollution in close proximity to residencies, which is a lot of the IE. But then I also think we need to start doing as much engagement as we can to the small trucking businesses that live and work in the region. We just posted a truck report that we did. We interviewed a bunch of local truck drivers about the zero emission transition, and they want to be part of it. But what's really hard is that these trucks are insanely expensive, the insurance, the language barriers, all of those things, right? And so how is it that these programs and a lot of this money is making sure we're using that money to also outreach to these truck driving companies so that they can also be involved, because they're the ones that have to then haul into their homes and et cetera, right, and bring those trucks in really close. And then lastly, I'll just say, and I think it's an ongoing conversation, is there's a really big piece around electrification, infrastructure, and the trucks, which I think is really important. But one other note that I think we try to bring in is around the mitigation. Right? For far too long, people have been living with these high levels of air pollution that affect their daily lives. And so how are we talking about filtration systems and HVAC windows and things that will help protect homes as we transition? Because folks can't leave just right away as this transition occurs. How are we protecting people along the way, I think, is going to be really important. And I guess lastly, I'll just say some of that money I know can go to school districts for infrastructure and to other agencies, which I think will be important. Like, how do we use the areas that already have some of the industry in there and replace them instead of just adding to the problem? I think there's a really big opportunity to really replace oil and gas to zero emissions.
Yeah, amen. All right, so last kind of final lightning round question in the theme of kind of road to 2028 commitments. Ian, I know you just rattled off a bunch of investments that you're going to be making. Maybe you can do it one more time for our commitment counters in the back, Lauren. What are you able to commit to improve freight electrification? What are you asking from other folks in the room in order to make that happen too?
Well, we have a lot to do. We have a lot of timelines into the Clean Air Act, and so every year really counts for us. We're going to continue to enforce our warehouse indirect source rule. It's a 5-year phase-in. We're in year 5 right now, so we're going to keep reporting on how that's going. We're going to keep on with the mitigation program and get that funding out the door. We're hoping to get that funding out next year, for this first tranche, and then keep going after that. We have our Invest Clean program that we're doing. That's $500 million we're hoping to get out the door. And then, we have a lot of other work our agency does. I see there's 23 seconds left, so I'm not going to get into all of it, but there's a lot happening, and it really takes everyone to chip in on it.
All right, well, we'll tally it up later and put it on the website then. Adrian, how about you?
I'll just commit to continuing to vigorously advocate for non-polluting trucks and buses and heat pumps and other clean technologies in the region.
And I'll just, I guess, ask, because I'm the same. I'll just ask that everyone also just commit to that, and let's commit to zero emissions on the way we get our stuff. And we all get stuff from different places, online and in person, and so everyone being part of calling for that transition of how we get our stuff is going to be important.
My ask would be, anytime you see an electric truck on the 710, point it out to everyone in your car, take a picture, share of it. They're growing in numbers every day. It's really exciting to see. All right, thank you all.
Thank you.